Hi, I'm Joshua Alexander, mental health freedom fighter, and today I have with me Cary, and she's going to share her healing testimony with the medical medium information. Hi, Cary.
Hey Joshua, how are you doing?
Good. Thanks for being on here.
Yeah, I'm excited to share. I think it's important.
Definitely try to reach people who are struggling.
hmm
Do you want to talk about kind of your early years of getting symptoms and what you were going through?
Yeah, so are we talking just mental health symptoms?
You could talk about all symptoms, but these mainly directed for mental
Focus.
health struggles. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So early years, um, I was generally pretty healthy as a kid. Um, I did have some other physical symptoms, like I was actually diagnosed with Lyme disease when I was a kid. And then I had like a bout in fifth grade where I was just like bedridden and out for part of the year and like little stuff like that that was showing other health issues just kind of popping up. But overall, I'd say I was a really happy, healthy kid. I had tons of friends. I played sports. I did theater. I was a really good student. I had a happy family life for the most part. Um, Yeah.
That's great.
And then, yeah. So you wouldn't like, based on my childhood, you wouldn't have expected what later occurred.
Mhm.
Um, I would say around ages like 11, 12, 13, like middle school area is when I started to experience some of the mental health symptoms. And looking back, I can see how, like, with all of the hormonal changes and like the stress of being middle school, probably like the metals that were very present in my brain and body were starting to oxidize and
Mhm.
cause the symptoms. So I remember, yeah, around like 12, maybe starting to get really, really racing thoughts and like
Mhm.
paranoia and anxiety, like really high anxiety. And I actually had like there's a name for it, there's a diagnosis for this now, but back when I was a teenager, there wasn't at the time. But I would sweat excessively. A medical medium has actually attributed that to metals as well.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I just started having this like extreme anxiety and extreme racing thoughts and like just paranoia about things and depression as well. And when I tell my family about it, they'd be like, "Oh, that's just what it's like to be a teenager. Like everybody gets stressed out being a teenager, like, and it was just like all chalked up to like this is what happens when you start to become an adult." So, I was
Mhm.
like, "Okay, I guess that's what this is. You read about all these angsty teens."
Mhm.
And so I was just like, "Okay." And when I would like tell my family how I was starting to feel depressed, it's like, okay, we go to the doctor and you start taking antidepressants. Um, so I think I'm trying to remember. I think started some antidepressants when I was like 12 or 13, like really young. And I remember feeling really weird on them. And so I took them for a little bit and then I stopped because I was just like, I don't, I was so young but I still was like, this doesn't feel right.
Mhm.
Not that there's anything wrong with antidepressants or that they should or shouldn't be used in certain circumstances. That's for everyone to decide. That this was just my experience with it. Um, and so yeah, basically like that began at that age. Um, and then when I was 16, I was diagnosed, or 15, 16, I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. And I just like I was a super active kid, like doing tons of sports, tons of theater. Like I was just always doing. And I was just suddenly bedridden. I couldn't function. I couldn't move. I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't speak for like 3 months. I just couldn't even get off my couch. I could barely eat because my lymph nodes were so swollen. And yeah, it basically didn't go away. Like I got better than that, but I remember saying to my parents, like, I'm really tired. Like, I don't feel ready to go back to school yet. Like, I'm so tired. And they were like, well, doctor says you're ready to go back, like, and they didn't know, but that's
Hmm.
just what it was. So, we know from medical medium information that that's Epstein-Barr virus and it's, accelerated stages. So I had an Epstein-Barr like ripping through me, as well as a ton of metals in my brain and body, which my dad passed away from Parkinson's disease, which we know is from medical medium information is caused by heavy metals. Um, and I think I was just born with a lot. Like I came into this world with a lot of metals. And then I had started to get these viruses as well. Maybe I was born with some of them as well. But the viruses in combination with the metals really can wreak a lot of havoc on your body. And, medical medium talks about how the viruses like burrow deep into your internal organs and then they wait for prime time to start,
Hmm.
you know,
So,
doing.
so, so after you were experiencing that chronic fatigue, that period, and then it got a little better, um, how did that progress from there? Were you trying other health trends or?
Yeah, I mean, I tried everything. So, I was sick for 17 years before I found Info. And basically, like, my symptoms just spiraled from there. Um, I was functional enough that I could, like, go to college and, like, work and stuff. But I felt like I was constantly pushing and trying so hard because I was just so sick and exhausted and but no one got it. Like when I would express how I felt, people would be like, "Oh, like that sucks." Like and I'd been to like the top doctors in New York City and they had given me this diagnosis, so that was like it as far as like anyone around me was concerned. Like you got the diagnosis, like, you know,
Hmm.
that's what
Yeah,
it is.
yeah,
So, yeah. I mean, but I mean, no one knew, like this was like back in the 90s and this just
yeah,
wasn't prevalent. The knowledge
yeah,
that knowledge is still flawed. It's still so flawed out there. But back then it was like the stone ages of things.
yeah. There's no validation for what people are going through then or now. It's like that people don't get the validation they need or deserve. So,
Right. Yeah. And I think often if people express like the things I was trying to express, it's flipped around and it's like, oh, well, it's probably in your head, like when I was like I was so while I was dealing with the Epstein-Barr symptoms of like chronic fatigue, and then I started to get what we now know as shingles symptoms, which I was so many diagnoses that I was given over my life. I was diagnosed with like degenerative disc disease and like a lot of like bone diseases because I had like horrible pain in my back and like I used to be an athlete and I had to stop running and you know playing soccer and doing all this stuff because my I was getting so sore all the time and everything hurt. Um, and like when I'd express these things, it was just like, oh well, I don't know, like deal with it. Like it's
yeah,
just like,
yeah,
you know. But
yeah,
that's why it's so important to get this information out there so that people can become aware of it and
yeah,
like learn like it's not in your head. There's for the mental health symptoms and for any other chronic health symptoms, there are really real physical reasons that are causing these symptoms and it's not your fault. You didn't
yeah.
do something wrong. You're not to blame. Your body's not faulty.
Hmm. Yeah,
There's physical root causes.
yeah, yeah. So, what time period was this from when you were had the chronic fatigue until like you discovered meth medium? You said it was 17 years since you first got sick, or like 12 or
Yeah. Yeah. So
so.
so I got sick around 16 and then 15, 16, and then 17 years later I found MM, but I went through hell even worse before I found that.
Okay.
So
So
um
like what age or is that? Was that?
which?
wherever you are in your story right now, like what time
Yeah,
period of your
yeah.
life? Like,
Well, so then let's see, in my 20s, I moved out to San Francisco and I was living out there. And I was just like, I'm going to push through everything. Like, I'm going to just do my life the way I want to do it. Like, I don't care. I'm going to make it happen. Like, no illness is going to stop me. And as I did that, I got sicker and sicker and sicker and was slapped with more diagnoses and more diagnoses. And, but there weren't ever answers. Like I saw the naturopaths, I saw the homeopaths, I saw the shamans, I saw the um, psychiatrist, one of the top psychiatrists from Stanford, who we paid like $600 an hour to see, back in like 2000 or whatever. Like I saw all these people to try to figure out why all these things were happening, and there weren't answers. And so
Mhm.
really like one of the peak points I think of my story is so I was about 28, 29 at this point, and I was going to it was like a grad school. It was uh teacher training for Waldorf education. So I was training to become a Waldorf teacher out in San Francisco. And I was going to school on the weekends, and then I was working full time during the week. And I had I just was busy all the time. And I was really sick. And I started to feel like I started to not be able to sleep at all. And it was like, as I look back on it in the couple months leading up to what happened, like my anxiety was getting higher and higher and higher. The racing thoughts were getting higher and higher. Um, the like paranoia was getting higher and higher. I started to, I remember I would try to like pick out my clothes in the morning, and like I couldn't pick out my clothes. I'd be like, should I wear red or green or blue? Like it was like my
Mhm.
thoughts were just uncontrollable.
Mhm.
And I was trying to meditate and I was trying to do all these things, to try to put myself together. And after like a number of probably like a month or two of not sleeping. I remember I'd like call my mom at night, just like crying, just like, I don't know what's happening. Like, I don't know. I feel so off. Like, and she'd be like, okay. Like, and she'd try to like talk me through it and stuff. But it was like, it was escalating for a while. And then it was like I was walking down the street one day in San Francisco, and it was like something. Well, what if, I mean, there's medical medium information, and then there's what it felt like to me. What it felt like to me was like something broke in my brain.
Mhm.
And I was, remember, like I was just on the street, and it was like something just like felt like something exploded in my brain. And I like couldn't see straight. I didn't know where I was. All my everything started getting confused of like what was reality and what wasn't. And I remember I just like collapsed on the ground and started crying like in the middle of the street. And San Francisco at that time, it's different now because it's all techie, but at the time it was like a crazy like hippie city. So that's like not that out of the norm there. Like kind of anything goes in San
Mhm.
Francisco. So people were just kind of like, I don't know, watching me. And I think a couple people came up and are like, "Are you okay?" And I was just like crying. I didn't know what was happening. I was so scared. And eventually I called a friend, and they called like the ambulance, and they like checked me out in an ambulance, and they were like, "Well, you seem fine." And I was like, "I'm definitely not fine." Like I don't know what's happening to my brain, but I'm not fine. Something's not right. And they were just kind of like, well, we don't know what to do, like we can send you to the hospital, but they don't really have much to do for you there. Or we could just send you home. And I remember just like being in this state of panic because I knew something horrible was happening, but there was like nothing around me, and there had been nothing around me for years, like to help,
Yeah,
you know?
it's
So
terrible. I can relate to that. It's that like fear and not knowing what's happening and not knowing where to go for help. And it's just, it's terrible. So,
yeah, and it's like something's wrong in your brain, but you can't, there's nothing to hold on to. There's nothing solid to grasp to,
hmm. Hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
So that continued, like basically like they sent me home, and then I woke up like I'm trying to remember the sequence of events because I went to the hospital like three different times. Um, I went again like later, like a few days later, I think, because I was feeling the same thing. And so I went to a different hospital and I was like, there's something really wrong with my brain. Like, I don't know what's happening. I don't feel right. Like, I feel like my world's falling apart. And they were like, I remember this very clearly. The woman checked me out and she goes, "You're just lonely. You need more friends."
Oh man.
And I was like, I have six roommates. Like, I have
Wow.
friends. Like,
Wow.
this is not loneliness. Like, I don't know what this is. This is like the hospital, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So,
Unbelievable.
unbelievable, right? So they sent me
Yeah.
home again. And then this was like the scary time. I went back and I was like trying to just like, I'm like, okay, what do I need to do? Like I had tried all the Western medicine and that had failed me for years. So at that point, I was living in San Francisco, which at that time was like the hub of like the you know, whatever new age spiritual stuff and everything. And so I was like, okay, I gotta meditate, I gotta breathe. Like, I'm just like trying to do like anything I can to try to help myself because I don't know what's happening to me. And then I woke up in the middle of the night just like screaming. Like I was so scared and I was having these really, really, really dark visions and I didn't know what was happening to me. And I was just like, my spirit and my will was just like broken because I was like, I have tried everything and I don't know what to do. Like, and I'm trying to tell people there's something wrong and no one knows the answers of how to fix it.
Mhm.
And they're not listening to me. Um, and I was just like screaming and it was really scary. And my roommates were terrified. They were so scared. They didn't know what was happening. I didn't know what was happening. Um, and the ambulance came to my apartment and I got on the stretcher and they took me in. And yeah, there was just nothing there. They like dropped me there. And I remember I was sitting in the lobby and like no one was coming and no one was helping. And I just started crying. And I remember I was sitting on the lobby floor crying for like hours. And I went to the psych ward and I was like, I remember this so clearly. I was having trouble seeing clearly. So I was tracing the letters of like what was written on the wall to try to focus because I couldn't even like focus. And if I
Mhm.
followed letters, it like helped me focus. And they finally like talked to me there and I was like, you gotta let me in. Like I'm don't know what's happening. Like something really awful is happening to me. Like you gotta let me in here. And the psych ward said to me, if you can communicate that, you don't belong here. They were like, this is not a good place. Like it's not gonna help you. That's what they said to me.
Ridiculous.
The psych ward. Like,
I'm feeling like a little bit of like trauma from you telling your story. It's just terrible. It's terrible because
oh,
I can
I'm
relate to a lot of
sorry.
this. No, no, it's fine.
Yeah.
I cannot believe how much it in the Wild West it is. Like,
And I really like it's hard, it's funny, Joshua, because I have never shared this story. Like, and there's more details that I don't even feel ready to share because I'm still processing the trauma from it as well.
yeah,
But like this, I feel comfortable sharing this. And like the reason why I'm sharing this is because I know that there's so many people that have had similar or their own varieties of this experience. And it's true what you just said. It's the Wild West. It's as well intentioned as so many of the folks may be who are working in that system and who are really trying to help folks, it does not solve the answer,
yeah,
the problem.
yeah,
And people who are in that situation, it not only is damaging to your body and your brain, but it breaks your soul and it breaks your
yeah,
spirit,
yeah,
And so I want people to know, like, who have been through something like I have and you have, or maybe we'll go through it later because it's crazy. As I've shared my story, so many people are like, I've experienced psychosis, like
mm,
whispering it because it's like, don't say it,
mhm.
like because you get stigmatized and you get boxed as someone who's incapable. And
You get blamed as if you're causing it. It's like someone with diabetes whose blood sugar gets low. They're not like looking at that person like that person can't keep his blood sugar on like up. Like
yeah,
they're not blaming the person. But
right.
with psychosis, it's like, oh, that's something to do with who you are or something.
Mm,
It's
yeah. You become
terrible.
like a leper, it's like,
Yeah.
ooh, I don't know, because people don't know what the actual root cause is. And so it's like,
Yeah.
ooh, I don't know what that is. So I don't want to like touch that.
Yeah.
But I really like, that's why I want to share this information because like those stigmas need to be broken. And the truth needs to be put out there of what is the root cause of what causes these like horrific
Yeah.
demonic symptoms in people, you
Yep.
know?
Yep. The Mercury demon.
Yeah. 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 So yeah,
So,
that like continued and basically there was like a couple other instances where I went to clinics and different places around the city. And I started to hallucinate and have these like really dark, horrific visions of things just like dying and decrepit and like it was just so awful. And because I'm from the East Coast, and so I was out in the West Coast, and I didn't really have family out there. I had a cousin, but I think she wasn't very helpful, and I think she was just like hands off, like I don't want to deal with this. Um, and so yeah, there wasn't really a lot of help, and um, my got this. My mom ended up flying out and she took me to a therapist that a friend had recommended. She didn't know what to do. Like she was terrified and had no clue what was happening. And the therapist, oh my God, I went to see this therapist and the therapist, it's like comical. Like the therapist was like, it sounds to me like you're having a major spiritual breakthrough. Like this is a wonderful time in your life. And I was like, what? Like, what are you like? I'm trying to like wrap my head around what this like supposed like professional is telling me. And I'm like trying to internalize it and be like, okay, so like, what do I do?
just to like think that therapy could solve something like this, it's like someone's like bleeding out from a gunshot wound and they're like, I'm bleeding, I'm starting to feel like lightheaded. And they're like, you got to sit and talk with a therapist and find out how you can resolve this. It's like,
Yeah,
it's insane.
it is insane. That's insane. And I
No.
think though, if you don't, the problem is systemic because it's not that people themselves are like insane. It's that the information that is in medical schools is false and doesn't cover what should be covered. And so you have these professionals that are put up on, these altars as like, oh, they know
Yeah.
so much. But they're not given the right information to know about that metals are causing these symptoms,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
so I also went, my parents paid for me to go to this top psychiatrist at Stanford. That was like one of the
Yeah.
other things that I did.
Yeah.
And I remember the psychiatrist was like, "Can you just give me a diagnosis? Like I just want to know." Like I was terrified.
Mm.
I had experienced these other things, but this psychosis of not like hallucinating, not being able to know where I was, like crying hysterically all the time, terror, like this was really scary. And but the psychiatrist from Stanford was like, well, she's like, you don't really seem like you have like bipolar, like, all these different diagnoses. She's like, you don't really have a history of that. And she's like, so I don't know. She's like, maybe you have like a temporary psychosis. And I was like, okay, temporary psychosis. I can like latch onto that. Like,
Mm.
what do I do about it? And she's like, she wanted to
Like,
like talk about my life and she goes, we could put you in a group home for a little while if you wanted. And I was like, what is that gonna do?
it's like cutting edge diagnostic tools. Like, kind of seems like you have a, like cutting edge, like they're
Yeah.
measuring it right down to the molecule with
And
them.
and protocols like, well, we could put you in a group home if you wanted. And I
I
was
was
like,
in a group home. It didn't help.
yeah, well, I looked, she gave me a pamphlet. She's like,
Yeah.
literally, she was like, you could do this if you wanted. Like, it wasn't
Yeah.
like any certainty. And I remember looking at it, it was just this like ugly dorm room. And I was like, I hate dorm rooms. Like, how is that going to solve my problems? Like, that's
Ay, ay, ay.
it's not going to solve anything. So I went through this cycle. And then, of course, I went to the healers. I was in San Francisco. And so I went to all the spiritual healers, and a number of them told me I was having this tremendous spiritual breakthrough. And I was like, great. I feel awful.
That's
Like,
such
what do I do? You know?
that kind of gets my blood boiling a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was
Uh,
just endless searching, for
Uh,
answers and no one having them. And my family was terrified. And, God bless their souls, they really didn't respond well. And they responded with their own conditioning and thoughts of what they thought something like that would be in their own traumas, because metals, people look at like experiences like this or diagnoses like schizophrenia or whatever, bipolar or any of these things, and they say, oh, I see how it's run in families, so it must be genetic. That's false. It's not that your genes are faulty. Medical medium shares that metals get passed down in utero. So if
yeah.
you have, like I had a father with a ton of metals in his body, that's passed down to me.
Mhm.
And as your brain heats up through stress, which I had a ton of stress leading up to this event, um, it oxidizes the metals, and specific metals oxidizing can cause psychosis.
Yeah.
So, it was like the perfect storm. Plus, I had already, my brain, my body, everything had been beaten down. My central nervous system had been attacked since I got the EBV was flourishing in me because I didn't
Hmm.
know any of this information. So I was giving it the food to fuel it, and it was breaking down my central nervous system and the
Yeah.
shingles, so it was just like, but now having those answers, it's like taking like a house off of my body, because the level of shame that I felt for years and years and years after that event was so immense. And it was like some part of my really bright, outgoing, gregarious, adventurous spirit just went like,
Hmm.
because I had no answers to why this thing had happened to me, and I never knew if it was going to happen again. And I was like pursuing my dreams and doing what I loved and in a place I loved and among people I loved. And this thing happened. And so it was sort of like in my mind, which isn't true, but this is what I internalized because of the trauma and lack of answers, was like, oh, well, I can't like pursue my dreams because
Yep.
if I do, then this horrific thing can happen that can like break my life apart.
Yeah. That's terrible. So what year, like, was that relative to when you found meth medium? Like how many years before
That
after that
was
psychosis episode?
Well, so there was a psychosis, and then 3 months after that, I collapsed in total pain. I like blacked out, and I was rushed to the ER, and the doctors told me that I was having organ failure.
Okay.
That, yeah, that like my
Wow.
organs were shutting down.
Wow.
And yeah. So it was like not only my mental health, but my physical health, like I
Yeah.
was literally dying.
Yeah.
Um, and the doctors told me, this is what they told me. They told me that I needed to take hormone medication because my hormones were imbalanced. And so that was why I was having organ failure. So they put me on hormone medication, and I started to like lose it. Like I was like crying all the time. Like the psychosis had like settled down. But then, I was in so much physical pain because like I just had organ
Yeah.
failure. And
Yeah.
yeah, I tried the hormones for like a week, and then I was like, no way am I doing this anymore. Like, this is crazy. And I remember I
Yeah.
called the doctor and I was like, I'm not going to take these hormones anymore. And the doctor was like, if you don't take these hormones, you're going to die. And I was like, well, I've tried your way for, 10 years or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
this isn't the way, like,
Yeah.
this is not the way. And then right after that, I started praying because I wasn't like into prayer prior to that.
Hmm.
Um, but I literally did not know what to do at that point. Like I had tried
Yeah.
everything.
Hmm.
And right after that, I met like literally the day or two after, um, I met this Tibetan doctor. And I had been, so the couple weeks leading up to the organ failure, which was a couple months after the nervous breakdown, I had started my period and it didn't stop. And I was just literally like gushing blood, like nonstop. I was just like literally bleeding out of myself.
Hmm.
And the doctors told me the hormones would stop it, but it hadn't. And so I was still just losing like tremendous amounts of blood. Oh, my cat,
Hmm.
just making sure she's not jumping out the window there. uh, yeah, so I basically like I met this Tibetan doctor who did not have me on the right things, but he pointed me for the first time in the right direction. And he listened to my pulses and he told me that my liver was extremely, extremely damaged and sick.
Hmm.
And the herbs that he put me on did stop the bleeding. So that was really, really powerful for me.
Hmm.
Um, and I think there was some restoration done. But then, he also had me like avoiding certain nightshades and like
Hmm.
eating like fish oil and like
Hmm.
all this other like BS.
Yeah.
Um, but I did after that, like him and this other doctor who's like very like part of this big foundation that everybody knows, like of alternative stuff.
Hmm.
They did have me cut out processed foods and I cut
Yeah.
out dairy and um yeah, stuff gluten. And so that helped. Like at least I was doing that. But then I was like eating liver and fish oil and
Hmm.
colostrum and bullet coffee and all this other like BS stuff that doesn't work. But that, but
So bizarre to me now. Like
I
now that
know.
we know the truth, it's like how can people just take a bunch of stuff, mix it together, and like prescribe it to someone? It seems so reckless to me when they don't
Yeah,
actually know what's happening. It's
I
bizarre.
know. Well, I mean, it's like I really think the system is so to blame. Like we need
Yeah,
to
yeah,
get
yeah.
correct educational models in these systems
Yeah.
because like if you're taught something by like a really reputable medical school, you're going to think it's right, you know?
Yeah.
Or like even a reputable alternative school, because you might go alternative because you think, okay, well, the Western system doesn't, it's not working, it's not helping my patients, so I'm going to try these other things.
Yeah.
And it's like these systems are just breeding bad things.
Yeah, just bizarre to me. It's so weird.
Yeah.
Like I heard people told me fish oil is good for your nervous system, right? Back when I was younger. And then I'm like, I just like accepted it with no evidence. And then I started telling people to take fish oil. It's like
Same.
with health, but with health, it's like that's so reckless. If it's like a movie you saw, like, oh, this movie was really great, and then you recommend it, that's different. But
Yeah.
it's just bizarre, the health realm.
I agree. I agree. I think everyone's trying to do their best. I mean, I
Yeah.
know when I was like, I was just trying to, oh, my little kitten just came down. Um, I was just trying to,
Yeah.
you just don't know. It's like
Yeah.
a sea of darkness out there, and
Yeah.
you just grab for whatever you can because you're
Yeah.
desperate and you're scared, and so it's easy to like just try something. And
Yeah.
there's such a sea out there. You don't know what's right or wrong,
Yeah.
like,
So some
but
of the things you were recommended were helping, like taking out the dairy and the gluten and
yeah,
stuff, and some weren't. But
yeah.
so where, how long was it until you found methamphetamine? I'm just curious, like
Yeah,
the
yeah,
time
yeah,
frame.
yeah.
Like,
So let me think. I found in 2018.
okay,
So that probably would have been like 4 or 5 years later. But
okay, all right,
yeah, but so basically, like what happened was um, I was teaching full time, but like when my kids weren't in the classroom, I would literally like collapse. Like I'd find the library and like just hide in a back shelf, like bookshelf, and just lay there because I like couldn't function. I was like everything hurt, and no one had any clue because I just like I did my best to hide it because there was life had shown me there were no answers, no one was going to help me, no one understood, and I was just really like I'm not giving up my life to this. Like I'm going to do what I can. But I was in constant, constant pain and constant suffering and just trying to do my
yeah,
best to live my life. And so I got so sick towards the end of the year. I was teaching first grade, these precious little first graders, and I got so sick, like I was constantly sick, but like by the end of the year, I was just so run down, exhausted, and I got hand, foot, and mouth disease, which is like what infants get. Like you have to have a really, really weakened immune system to get that, and you get like the red pox all over you.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, there's something really wrong. So basically, like long story short, I ended up moving back to the East Coast, and I moved in with my family for a little while, and I slowed my life down like immensely. Like out in San Francisco, I had like a really busy, active life. But when I moved back home, I was just like babysitting my little cousins, and that was very chill and very mellow. And I was living at home with my mom's, and so I was like sleeping all the time. But I was like severely dealing with depression and anxiety, and then tons of PTSD from everything I've been through, plus just like extreme exhaustion. And like, I mean, I had so many symptoms, so I was just struggling. But I will say, like, getting off of the processed foods and the dairy and the gluten helped. Slowing my life down so that I wasn't doing so much did help as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I went paleo for a while, and that helped because I cut out like all any other like junk stuff in
Mm-hmm.
food got cut out. Um, and it also incorporated in more vegetables. So I was eating a lot more vegetables than I would
Mm-hmm.
eat typically. So I think those things were beneficial,
Mm-hmm.
but I was doing paleo, and it was like there was a limit, like there's only so much I could do. So
Mm-hmm.
I moved out to Pennsylvania area, and I was working in a school, and I was working part-time because I just knew I couldn't do like full-time work,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like struggling to make ends meet because like it's just like the exhaustion. But I knew if I did it part-time, like that could work. And it was a really special and wonderful school. And a colleague of mine was asking, they were asking me about like my diet and stuff, and because they saw I always eat a specific way. And I told them a little bit about my journey, not everything. I just said I've been sick,
Mm-hmm.
And one of my colleagues was like, "Have you ever heard of the medical medium?"
Mm-hmm.
There's, or no, sorry, she no, she didn't say that. She said there's these studies that have been done that shows that Epstein-Barr virus could be at the root cause of chronic health symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
And that really triggered me because when I had first gotten sick, I had mono really bad. That was
Mm-hmm.
like the initial. And so I knew that was Epstein-Barr virus. And I was like, oh, what's that? And so I was like asking her to tell me more because that seemed to make sense to me. And then she's like, oh, it's this guy, the medical medium. And I was like, that sounds like a bunch of hooey. Like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
medium can't tell me what's wrong with my health.
Yeah.
And she was like, yeah, but he really goes into detail. Like, you should really check it out. And I just like, in my mind, I couldn't get behind like a medium telling me about my health. And I was just like, oh, whatever. Um, so I listened to some radio shows of his, and I actually just started like bawling because like the like spirit, the Holy Spirit of like what he was saying was like hitting me in addition to like the truth of my experience with what he was saying.
Oh.
It was really powerful, but I had been through so much trauma around my health that it was really hard for me to try anything or accept anything because I had been through so much. And so it was about 6 months after, probably 5 months after she told me about it, that I was just, long story short, I was just really desperate. And I had this very powerful experience that I can't describe, like where I just, uh, I suddenly knew in my bones, like it was like it was it's there's no logical explanation for what I experienced. But I just suddenly had this realization within me that I couldn't eat meat anymore. Like I was eating copious amounts of meat, and
Mm-hmm.
that I needed to change my diet. And I just physically couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember being terrified because I knew that like food protocol, I knew that food was important. I had learned that out in San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought paleo must be the answer because it had gotten me a little bit better, but I was still
Yeah.
at this like wall.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, if I don't eat paleo, like I don't know what to do. If I don't eat meat, like what am I going to do?
Yeah.
And I was at the health food store. One of my friends worked there, and I was like, what do I do? Like, I just know I can't buy meat. And she was a vegan, so she was like, yeah, you shouldn't eat meat.
Yeah.
Um, and she was like, I don't know, Carrie, like I don't know what to tell you. And I was so upset. And I walked home. It was like a couple blocks from my house. And I had ordered the medical medium book because I was like, maybe I'll like read it and check it out. And I
Hmm.
was like so like distraught because if I didn't have a protocol to follow, I didn't know what to do. And I was terrified of going back to where I was.
Hmm.
And when I got home, on my front porch was sitting the medical medium book.
Wow. That's
And
awesome.
yeah. So I opened it up and I opened it up to the 28-day cleanse.
Wow.
And I'm just like an all or nothing person. I'm like, okay, like if I'm going to do this, then I have to do it 100% because otherwise I won't know if it works. Like if I just
Hmm.
do a little of what he's saying, I won't know
Hmm.
if this works. And I don't even know if I believe it, but I'll give it a try, right? Because here's something I can follow. Like I'm very
Hmm.
disciplined. I'll follow things if I think they're correct.
Hmm.
And so I was like, all right, I'm gonna do this full on. So I it had worked out again, like very serendipitously, unexplainably, that my one of my vegan friends and I had planned this trip into the mountains that weekend. And
Hmm.
so I called her up and I was like, hey, I'm gonna bring like a ton of fruit and veggies on our trip. Like I'm trying this. And she was like, yeah, like that's how I eat. You know, it made me
Hmm.
feel so like safe doing it because I
Hmm.
was like, this is so weird. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and then that I started and I did the 28-day cleanse and I remember feeling like this like massive like blanket of lead was like lifted off of my body.
Yeah.
And I think like physically it was like my liver finally having a chance to not process fats
Yeah.
and breathe. And I think spiritually there's a very strong spiritual impulse and, cleansing spirit in these protocols
Hmm.
and that was what I was feeling as well because since these protocols come from God from a spiritual source they're not just they are physical but they're also you know
Yeah.
spiritual power as well.
Yeah, definitely. And just so people know, like who aren't familiar with medical medium, medical medium doesn't necessarily say everyone has to be plant-based or vegan.
Yeah,
Like a medical medium principle is lowering the fats for a plethora of reasons why it helps with symptoms. But um, for I personally don't, I'm plant-based as well, personally. And with my experience with severe mental illness symptoms like psychosis, it like I think really, really low on the fats is like actually really helpful. So,
yeah,
but there are
that's an important point to make.
yeah. So
Yeah, you can eat meat. Like he never says don't eat meat.
yeah.
In my circumstance, the reason why that was significant for me was because I had already cut out, like medical medium talks about these, he calls them the no foods, and they're
Mm,
foods that feed viruses.
yeah.
And meat doesn't necessarily do that, but it, like Joshua said, it blocks it fills up the bloodstream so that you can't detox as easily.
Yeah.
And so if you're eating it all day long, morning, evening, night, like I was on paleo, like it just basically like stops the doesn't it slows down significantly the detox process. So again, you can eat it. But for me, I had already cut out, everything else. And so for me at that point, that was a really important step for me. But yeah, Joshua's
Yeah.
totally right.
Yeah.
Um,
Just so
it's
people know,
yeah,
because if people have mild symptoms, mental illness symptoms like mild depression or anxiety or something, they could probably heal eating like meat for dinner or something. I mean,
yeah,
Anthony did say recently, if you're eating fat in the morning, your liver can't detox. It just stops it.
yeah,
So the morning
yeah,
cleanse is a good idea for everyone. But anyway, sorry to
yeah.
interject there.
No,
But
no, I'm glad
yeah,
you said that actually,
yeah,
because I just did another interview with someone and I paused to explain that. So I'm
yeah, yeah,
glad that
yeah,
you, because that
yeah,
can be like misconstrued.
yeah. I don't want people to think we're on one side of the food wars. So
No, no, we're not on the
yeah.
food wars.
Yeah.
There's a lot.
So,
And just to since we're on that topic really briefly too,
yeah.
like gluten and dairy themselves aren't necessarily like harmful, so to speak, but when you have pathogens in the body, those
Yeah.
pathogens have been bred and feed off of those foods.
Yeah.
So you're essentially feeding the pathogens and so that they can multiply. So that's the
Yeah.
reason why there are like harmful ingredients like MSG and like canola oil and things like that that do harm to the body. But
Yeah.
just wanted to
Yeah.
clarify that too.
Yeah. Definitely. That's the difference between knowing what's actually causing the symptoms and just playing guessing games and mixing a bunch
Yeah,
of stuff together. So, yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
So you're
Yeah.
doing the 28-day cleanse. You're starting to feel like what did you say? Lead something was taken off your body or something?
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
started to feel like just relief,
Yeah.
like from the exhaustion and um the like I mean, I had such a sluggish liver at that point, like that just I'm trying to remember back because it has been so long since I've had those feelings and experiences, but um it's like my mood would shift all the time because my liver was so overburdened. Plus, I still had all the metals in me.
Hmm.
And I was just like, I felt weighed down constantly. I felt like, even though I was thin, like I felt heavy and like, oh, like I couldn't like function and just like, um, yeah, exhausted. And like, I started that didn't disappear within the 28-day cleanse, but I started
Hmm.
to see things lift in a way like a wall that I couldn't get past through paleo was just like burst open.
Hmm.
So I had so many symptoms to knock back. It took me time. And again, like even though I saw those changes, it took me years to really fully trust this information because
Yeah.
I had been so burned. And I didn't know if I really believed that I had such a variety of symptoms like
Hmm.
cardiovascular, lymphatic system, cerebral and brain, like liver, skin, bones. Like I had so many symptoms,
Hmm.
and I didn't know if I believed that MM could change all those symptoms.
Hmm.
And so it'd be like symptom by symptom. Like I used to get really horrific UTIs,
Hmm.
and like it would just be like hospital level, and it would just come on out of nowhere, and it would be awful. And I remember one day, like I stayed on the antibiotics. I was like, okay, these are gonna do it. This is gonna do it. And I remember I was on a round of antibiotics and it wasn't working. And I'd like called up a friend to use her antibiotics. And I was using hers and that wasn't working. And I was like overdosing them. And I knew that if like I didn't change something, I'd have to go to the hospital the next day.
Hmm.
And so I looked up, this is like while I'm like learning MM info, I looked up his all his free info. It's all free out there on UTIs. And I listened to the radio show and I
Hmm.
followed to a T exactly what he said to do. And I literally like slammed my body with all of the herbs.
Hmm.
And I stayed like raw and fat free for a few days. And I have literally never since then gotten a UTI.
Wow.
Like they're gone.
That's amazing. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, it was really miraculous. So like instances like that started to help me see that this works and believe in it and have faith
Hmm.
in it. And I knew in terms of mental health, I I couldn't afford everything. That was the other thing too. When I first
Hmm.
started, I really couldn't afford all the supplements like at all, and I could
No.
barely afford to get all the fruits and vegetables. So I just did the best I could, but my intuition told me like, girl, you need a lot of wild blueberries. Like
Hmm.
and I didn't even know enough about the info to realize why at that point, but I
Hmm.
just tried to have as many wild blueberries as I could, and I made the heavy metal detox smoothie every day because
Hmm.
again, I didn't know enough about how metals cause mental illness and everything I had been experiencing for so long, but I did know in my intuition that I really needed this. So
Hmm.
I drank the heavy metal detox smoothie every day for like 2 years, and I
Hmm.
didn't even have the right spirulina for a long time. I didn't have
Hmm.
the right barley grass juice powder that he recommends, like the highest quality.
Hmm.
But it's still, even with that, it was still working.
Hmm.
And I remember very crystal clear. It was about 2 years in, and I lived across the street from my parents at that point. And I remember I was walking across the street to go to their house, and the sun like hit me as I was walking across the street. And it was another one of these spiritual, like unexplainable moments. And it just, as the sun hit me, I suddenly had this like realization that my depression and anxiety, which used to rule my life and like was constantly under everything that I would do and think, and like it was just this like living, breathing thing constantly in my life, was like significantly less. And
Hmm.
it was like if it had been up here before, it was like down here.
Hmm.
And I remember like it was just this like aha moment. And I was like, oh my God, like
Yeah.
that's changed.
Yeah.
I can't even believe that,
That's
you know?
wild. Yeah.
Yeah. And then as I just continued to, I still drink the HMDS every single day.
Hmm.
I still do like heavy metal cleanses that he has because even though those symptoms have been gone, depression, anxiety, like they've been gone for a very long time now. And I feel sadness and I feel anxious about things that like deserve those things, like
Yeah.
anxious situations. But
Yeah.
that chronic, insidious, nonstop and the psychosis, like that's never come back.
Yeah.
Like, um, I feel those normal things, but that chronic nature of it is just gone. It's
Yeah.
gone. And like, and now I do it for maintenance and just to make sure like the metals can get deep, like heavier
Yeah.
metals go deeper into the brain. And so
Yeah.
you can, even though you feel great, like you can still have metals in there. So I do
Yeah.
it for both maintenance and to like ensure full cleansing because those
Yeah.
metals will get passed on to any children that I have.
Yeah. And we're getting continual exposure, new exposure as well,
Yeah,
daily.
exactly.
So,
Yeah,
from
exactly.
yeah, that's amazing. Like, I can relate to a lot of your journey, a lot of the things you said. I experience very similar types of things, and it hurts hearing what you went through. No one should ever have to go through that level of trauma and like pain. It's just like terrible. It's terrible. So,
Yeah.
and what would we do? Like if we didn't have medical medium information, what would we do?
Oh, I wouldn't be
Like,
alive.
yeah,
There's
me
no
me
way I'd be
neither.
alive.
Me
Yeah.
neither.
I would have like taken my own life or I would have died from like
Yeah,
failure of my body.
yeah,
I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that I would
yeah,
not be alive without it.
yeah. Me too.
Yeah.
It's just, I'm just so grateful this information is here.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, just I appreciate you sharing your story and your powerful healing testimony. That's like those are not easy symptoms to get past and to go through and to heal. And like that's really powerful that you've been able to heal so much. So thank you for sharing. It's a
Yeah.
great inspiration for people who are struggling out there. And
Yeah. And I
so
want to say too that like when you go through those symptoms, like even as you remove the physical toxins that are creating those symptoms, there's a lot of damage to the soul that's done,
mhm,
and there's a lot of healing that needs to happen there. And um, the medical medium has healing information for that as well.
mhm,
And there's a lot, like it may sound, I think because we're so conditioned in our world to think that like if you've had a trauma, you need to do a certain amount of things. And this isn't, I'm not saying like don't go to therapy. I did go to therapy and it was honestly while I was doing Info, it was actually very helpful for me.
mhm,
Um, I had a great therapist and she really helped me like reclaim my voice after so many traumas and she was
mhm,
great. Um, but there were limitations with that and there were places that those things couldn't go. And I will say like continuing to do the cleansing, like it's that the cleansing protocols are so helpful for PTSD. And then there's he has so much information and meditations and things that you can do to heal the soul. Like
yeah,
the soul is like a living thing. It's like, you know, I mean, I won't get too into that because everybody has different beliefs and thoughts, but
yeah,
the soul can get injured and the soul can get
yeah,
wounded. And there are things that we can do to heal the soul. And
yeah,
Anthony has just said, like, I think I was rewatching a live he did after the first light blast. And he
mhm,
was talking about how, like, if people just understood that when you're like in a lot of emotional pain, you want to address the soul healing.
Hmm.
Like that to me was so profound and powerful. And
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of truth in that. And there's a lot that he puts out there that helps to heal the soul
Yeah.
and heal the wounds and the trauma from that too. So I just want to
Definitely.
share that as well.
Definitely. Yeah. And even reading the books, like the parts of the books that talk about basically give validation to what we've gone through, like the compassion in those words, and those are living words from
Yeah.
above. So just reading the books is like healing for the soul as well. But
Oh, 100%.
um,
And you get, as you
uh,
read those words, like you get imbued with the love and the compassion that those words share. And it's
yeah,
like, it brings you to a different place.
yeah,
So,
that's important with mental health struggles people go through.
yeah,
Um, so yeah. Well, thank you so much. This was great. Like I said, I relate to so much what you went through, and I'm so glad that you're through all that, and
me
you're
too.
you're. But like it takes a strong uh, type of person to go through some of that kind of stuff. So it's a testament to you and your perseverance, and you kept searching, and you found answers, and you healed, and that's inspiring. So thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, of course. And like,
Um,
I just want anyone to know out there who is watching this, who maybe like you found it because it's like 2 a.m. and you're just like, you can't live with these symptoms anymore. Like, just, or whatever, however you're coming to this information or watching this interview, like, just know there are answers. Like, you've heard me speak, like, I speak well, like, I have thoughts that are coherent. I'm not
yeah.
bogged down in the misery that I used to be. And I'm saying all that because I once was there. And
Mhm.
I know, like, very clearly how horrific and dark those experiences can be. I mean, I wanted to take my own life for years and years, and I even attempted it at one point, like, well, got very close to attempting it.
Yeah.
So I understand that place of just like sheer darkness. And I really want folks watching this to know that there are answers, that you don't have to live like this forever at
Right.
all, and that
Hmm.
the protocols take time. It
Hmm.
doesn't happen overnight. So if you're like really inspired watching Josh's amazing interviews, because he's interviewing tons of people, and if you get super inspired and you're like, oh my God, all these people have healed, like I can do it too, know that it takes time. Don't, oh, no, 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 no. Sorry, my little
That's a,
kitten.
oh,
She's,
cute.
yeah, this is Tiger.
Oh, so
Yeah,
cute.
was just getting into something she shouldn't.
Oh,
But
yeah.
yeah, just know that it takes time, and um like detox can be weird sometimes and can bring up weird feelings and weird experiences, but just like stay connected to the community, to the books, and like learn as you go, and you really can heal. It just don't have the expectation that it's going to happen overnight, because it's
Yeah.
probably not. It could,
Yeah.
but it probably won't.
Yeah.
So like stay dedicated to it, keep going, and like connect with other connect with other people in your community,
Yeah.
in the medical medium community, so that you can feel supported and get the validation that like you need.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Great. So thank you so much. I,
Yes.
I appreciate it.
That's it, no more.
All right. I take care, Kay.
All right, thank you, Joshua.